On my 70th birthday, I showed up at my son's house with a warm peach cobbler I'd baked myself and a little gift I'd wrapped with care. My daughter-in-law Jessica opened the door. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. She was wearing a shiny silver dress and had her hair and makeup done like she was going to be in a magazine. She didn't smile. She just looked surprised, like I wasn't supposed to be there. "Oh, you're here early," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "People are still arriving, and the photographer is setting up." Then she led me inside. Without another word, I walked through the hallway, past strangers in fancy suits holding glasses of champagne. There was a long table covered in tiny foods. I didn't recognize little things on sticks and big shrimp that probably cost more than my whole week of groceries. My heart started to pound. I wanted to ask where Michael was, or if my grandkids were upstairs. But before I could say anything, Jessica turned to me and said in a soft but cold voice, "Could you just wait downstairs for a bit? We're trying to keep things organized up here. The basement's quiet. There's a folding chair." She was already walking away before I could answer. I looked down the stairs. The light was dim, and there were laundry baskets and cold concrete floors. My chest felt tight, like something was squeezing me from the inside. I wanted to ask if she was joking, but no one even looked my way. No one cared, so I held my cobbler tight, walked down the steps, and sat on the folding chair by the dryer. Upstairs, the music thumped, and I could hear people laughing. Then, I heard Jessica's voice floating down through the floorboards. "She still brings that same cobbler every year. Bless her heart." Everyone laughed. My face got hot. I stared at the shiny foil over my dish and knew, right then, that I didn't belong there anymore. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking. I pulled a napkin out of my purse and wrote the only thing I could think of. "Thanks for the basement. I raised this family in mine." I set it on top of the cobbler. Then I put the wrapped gift for my grandson on the dryer and walked out the back door. No one stopped me. No one even noticed I was leaving. I didn't cry on the drive home. Not even one tear. I just stared at the traffic lights and the palm trees going fuzzy outside my window while the radio murmured about something I didn't care about. All I could see in my mind was that napkin on my cobbler. I kept wondering if anyone would even read it before throwing it all away. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my little apartment, I didn't go right inside. I sat there in the dark for a while, watching a group of teenagers taking pictures and laughing like nothing bad had ever happened to them. I used to laugh like that, too. Frank and I would dance around the kitchen when no one was watching. Back when Michael was just a boy who thought I was the smartest, kindest person in the world. I stayed in the car until the dome light went out. Then I picked up my purse and walked inside, where it smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. Turn on the TV. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just stood there in the middle of the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the wall back before Jessica dyed her hair, before she started correcting me in front of everyone, before I began to feel like a shadow at my own family's gatherings. I wanted to call someone that night, but not Michael, not my sister either. She would have just told me I was making a big deal out of nothing. I thought about calling the ladies from church, but it was Saturday night, and I didn't want to hear pity in their voices. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made a cup of tea. I boiled some water, sat down at the kitchen table, and held the warm mug close to my chest. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call or a text, just a notification from the home security app I'd helped Michael set up last year when they were worried about people stealing packages off their porch. I'd never deleted it. Out of habit, I opened the app. There on the screen, in that cold black and white night vision, I saw the side of their house. The patio lights were on. People were walking out, laughing together. Jessica's mother was hugging everyone goodbye like she was the queen of the whole world. My cobbler was still sitting on the dryer. The notification hadn't come from them. They hadn't called. No one had texted me, not even my grandson. That was when it finally sank in. It wasn't sadness or even anger. It was just this clear, hollow feeling inside me. I didn't matter. In that house, I could disappear, and they'd keep eating shrimp and taking pretty pictures and drinking their fancy champagne like nothing had changed. Around midnight, there was a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Green from 4B. She said she'd seen my lights on and brought over some extra chili she'd made. I told her I wasn't hungry, but she came in anyway. She sat across from me in her house, shoes and asked what had happened. I told her everything, all of it, even about the note I left on the cobbler. She didn't interrupt, she just listened and nodded every so often. Then she reached across the table and put her warm hand over mine. You don't have to take that, she said, gentle but sure. You're not invisible. I didn't say anything back. But later, when I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, I thought about her words. I'm not invisible. Maybe I just needed to stop waiting around for people who kept acting like they couldn't see me. The next morning, I woke up early. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. The look on Jessica's face when she opened the door. The laughter drifting down through the floor. The way no one followed me out when I left. I tried to distract myself with a crossword puzzle and a slice of toast, but nothing helped, so I decided to take my usual walk around the block. I hoped it would clear my head. Right away, I ran into my neighbor Irene. She was on her way to the mailbox. She smiled big and said, I saw Michael's party online. It looked just like a wedding. Before I could think of what to say, she pulled out her phone. You have to see these pictures. I didn't even try to pretend to smile. My face just stayed blank as she scrolled through Jessica's Facebook album called The Party of the Year. There were 153 photos, all edited with sparkles and filters. Jessica posing with a glass of champagne, the kids in matching outfits, Michael standing in front of a big sign that said, Happy 40th to our rock. And in one of the photos, there it was, my peach cobbler, still sitting on a table in the corner, untouched, behind the drink station. No label on it like the other dishes. Not even served. My stomach dropped. Irene kept flipping through, not noticing how stiff I'd gone. And look at this one, she laughed. They got a big family picture on the staircase, just like in those magazines. I leaned closer. There they all were, Jessica's mom, right in the center, smiling like she owned the place. Michael next to her, his hand on her shoulder. My grandchildren beaming in front. Jessica holding a cake I hadn't baked. I wasn't in the photo, not even in the back, peeking around someone's shoulder. It was like I'd never been there at all. Then Irene swiped too far and stopped. Oh, she said, tapping the screen to zoom in. That's you, isn't it? It was a blurry picture of me walking past the front window, holding my gift bag with my head down, cropped out of the fun, cropped out of my family. I nodded, handed her the phone, and told her I needed to get going. She didn't notice that my voice had gone tight. When I got back to my apartment, I just sat there staring at the wall. I wasn't sad anymore. I was past sad. It felt like I was being erased, little by little. And the worst part wasn't that they left me out, it was that no one even thought I'd care. Like I didn't deserve a phone call or even a polite excuse. They just didn't think of me at all. I opened my laptop, not to check email or play solitaire, like I usually did, but to log into an old account I hadn't touched in years. One I'd kept, just in case. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't seen since Frank's funeral, Olivia Sanders. She wasn't family. She wasn't even a friend. She was a lawyer. And she was about to remind me who I used to be before I ever let that house make me feel small. Olivia picked up on the second ring. The second I heard her voice, steady, sharp, no small talk, I felt 20 years younger. Like I'd finally stepped back into the version of myself who didn't wait around for permission to matter. Before I could start second-guessing myself, I told Olivia everything. I started with the party, the basement, the napkin on the cobbler, and ended with how the dish was still sitting there, untouched. She didn't interrupt me once. She just listened quietly. When I was done, she said, I take it you're not calling just to vent. And I told her, no, I'm not. I wanted to know what was left in the trust Aunt Lillian set up all those years ago, the one she insisted on giving to me after I stayed by her side for 6 long months, while her kids disappeared until it was time for the funeral. Olivia didn't even have to search very long. She had the paperwork right there. When she told me what she found, my chest felt tight for a second. The trust matured last quarter, she said. You're sitting on just over $2.1 million, Evelyn. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there holding the phone against my ear, staring at the TV screen where I'd paused an old Hallmark movie an hour earlier. All I could think about was how I'd spent my last birthday standing beside a washer and dryer while strangers upstairs toasted with champagne. You want to access it? Olivia asked. No, I told her. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to figure out who I was going to be, now that I wasn't the woman everyone could shove downstairs and forget about. I thanked her and wrote the number, $2.1 million, on a little sticky note. I sat there looking at it the rest of the day. Not because I was shocked by the money. I'd always guessed Aunt Lillian left me something big, but because I finally realized how long I'd been pretending I had no power, no choices. I wasn't poor, but I'd lived small on purpose. I was careful never to get in the way or ask for more than scraps, leftovers, holidays, and birthdays. I was lucky to be invited to, and all this time, I could have changed everything. I could have moved somewhere else, traveled, built a whole new life, but I didn't. I just waited and waited. But now, I was done waiting. That night, I didn't make tea. I poured myself a glass of boxed wine I'd kept in the back of the pantry for special occasions I never let myself celebrate. I sat on the balcony and watched the freeway lights. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. The next morning, I opened the security app again, not to spy, just to see. I replayed the video from the party. I watched Jessica's mother walk in holding a gift box shaped exactly like mine. I watched Jessica beam and hug her like she was royalty. Later in the footage, I saw them pick up my cobbler from the buffet and carry it out of sight, setting it on top of the washer in the garage, where it stayed. I fast-forwarded to the part where everyone posed for family photos. Someone laughed about finally getting the lighting right. And I didn't cry. I watched it all with a kind of calm I didn't recognize in myself, like I was studying strangers. And maybe I was, because the people in that video weren't really my family anymore. They were characters in someone else's show. I was just the extra in the background until now. I didn't touch the money right away. I didn't move a single dollar, or book a trip, or buy a thing, because it wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant and what I was finally ready to do with it. I sat with that feeling for a few days, thinking it through. Not about revenge, exactly, but something closer to fairness. A way to close this chapter without shouting or slamming doors. That's when I called Larry, my neighbor. He used to be a private investigator before he retired. He was the one who always fixed my leaky faucet and still read every legal paper like it was a crossword puzzle. I asked if he still had any contacts who could help with financial records, not to do anything shady, just to check on something. Within a week, Larry had the answer I'd already guessed. Michael had poured most of their money into some sketchy investment with a friend of a friend who'd already been investigated by the SEC. Even worse, he'd signed Jessica's name on a bunch of the paperwork to get around the rules. If that deal fell apart, they'd both be in trouble. It all traced back to a man named Curtis Wells. I remembered Curtis clearly. He was the one who came to a family barbecue 2 years ago and spent the whole afternoon bragging about crypto and insider deals. I pulled Michael aside that day and said, "He's not a businessman, he's a gambler." But Michael just rolled his eyes and told me I didn't understand the new economy. I guess he was right. I didn't understand how you could gamble your family's future just to look rich on Instagram. Larry told me the SEC was already looking into Curtis again. All I had to do was make sure the right documents got to the right people anonymously, of course, and that was easy. One envelope, dropped in a mailbox 2 neighborhoods away, with copies of emails, account records, screenshots, and a short note that simply said, "Check for forged signatures on account transfers." And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. About 10 days later, Jessica posted a picture on her Instagram story. She was crying in her car, her face red and wet, with a caption that said, "Prayers appreciated." By the next afternoon, Michael's business website had disappeared, and all those fancy brand deals she was always bragging about were gone from her page. People started leaving comments like fraud and karma. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt quiet. I felt still. The next day, I went to the library and printed out the photo I'd taken of the napkin I'd left on top of my cobbler. I put it in a plain envelope, no return address, and mailed it to their house. I didn't add a note. I didn't have to. They knew exactly who sent it. That same evening, Jessica's mom posted one of those dramatic quotes about how loyalty runs thicker than blood, and I actually laughed out loud, because if loyalty meant you could eat cake upstairs, while the woman who raised your grandkids sat alone with the mop and water heater, then I wanted no part of that kind of family. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and my laptop open. I watched their social media go quiet, the likes disappearing. the silence settling in like dust. It wasn't just satisfying, it was proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't yelling, it's walking away without a single word. 2 weeks after everything went dark online, my doorbell rang. Not a soft knock, either. 3 quick rings, loud and urgent. When I opened the door, there was Jessica. Her face looked raw, like she hadn't slept in days. She was still carrying that expensive handbag she'd shown off all last year, but now it looked silly hanging over her old hoodie and pajama pants. No filters this time, no polished smile. Before I could say anything, she started talking fast, words spilling over themselves. I know you're probably still upset. You have every right to be. But we're in real trouble, Evelyn. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't nod. I just stepped back and let her in because I wanted to see how far she would go before she started asking for help. She walked into my kitchen like it still belonged to her, sat down at the table, and started crying. She told me everything, how Michael's accounts were frozen, how they'd pulled the kids out of their fancy after-school programs, how her sponsors dropped her, how they had to sell one of their cars just to pay the mortgage. Every few sentences, she'd say, "We didn't know," or "It wasn't personal." I let her talk until she ran out of breath. I just sat across from her with my hands folded in my lap, watching the same woman who once told me my casserole didn't fit their diet now sit there begging. Finally, I asked her, calm as ever, "What is it you're actually asking me for?" She looked down, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked embarrassed. "We need help, financially, emotionally. I don't even know, Jess. Something, anything. I know I was wrong. I know we treated you like you were just ... there. Like you didn't matter. But I swear, I didn't mean for it to be cruel." And maybe she believed that, maybe, in her mind, making me sit alone in the basement was just a little choice she made because she felt pressured. Maybe she'd convinced herself it wasn't that big of a deal. But to me, it didn't matter anymore. Because whether it was on purpose or not, the hurt was the same. I stood up and walked to the drawer by the fridge. I pulled out an envelope I'd already prepared days earlier, the moment I saw their little kingdom start to fall apart. I handed it to her without a word. Her hands were shaking when she opened it. Inside was the napkin, the one I left on my cobbler. I'd flattened it out and slipped it into a clear sleeve so she could see every word she tried to forget. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked up and asked, her voice small, "Is this ... is this supposed to be a message?" And I looked her straight in the eye and said, soft and steady, "No, Jessica, it's not a message. It's a reminder." She blinked at me like she couldn't understand what I meant. And that's when I saw it, the moment it finally clicked for her that I wasn't going to give her anything. Not money, not comfort, not forgiveness. Wrapped up in a check for the first time since she married my son, she looked like someone who finally knew what it felt like to be told no. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. She stood up slowly, folded the napkin back into the envelope, and said, "I don't know how we fix this." And I held the door open and told her, calm as ever, "You can't fix something you never thought was broken until it cost you." She left without another word, clutching that envelope like it might burn her fingers. And I locked the door behind her, not out of spite, but out of peace. 3 days later, I was folding towels on the couch when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize at first. Just a simple message that said, "Hi Grandma, I'm sorry. I saw you leave that night. I didn't know what to do." When I saw the name Lee, my grandson, I had to sit down. Because for all the silence I'd learned to accept from that house, that one small message hit harder than I ever expected. And I didn't write back right away. I just stared at the screen, my hands still, the laundry slipping off my lap. And when I finally found the words, I typed back, "Thank you for saying that. Would you like to meet for a walk?" He answered, almost right away, "Yes, please." We met the next day at the park near my apartment, just after school. He came toward me in his hoodie and jeans, his backpack slung over one shoulder like it weighed 10 times more than it should. When he saw me, he walked faster, a little awkward, taller than I remembered. His voice was deeper, too. He said, "I wanted to say something that night, but I didn't know what was happening until you were already gone. Then Mom told me you just left because you weren't feeling well." I nodded and let him talk. I could see in his eyes he'd been carrying that guilt for weeks, maybe longer. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out the little gift bag I'd brought to the party, the one with the blue ribbon I'd tied myself. He held it out and said, "I found this in the garage." It was stuffed behind the cooler, I thought, maybe you'd want it back. I took it from his hands slowly, my heart tightening not because of the gift, but because he had looked for it, because he decided it mattered enough to bring it to me. You didn't have to do this, I told him gently. He shook his head hard. I wanted to. And I could tell this wasn't something Jessica told him to do. This was him, on his own, trying to make something right in a mess he didn't create. We sat there on the bench for a while, watching dogs chase each other across the grass. Then he asked, in a small voice, "Are you mad at us?" I said, "I'm not mad at you. I never was." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for weeks. Good. I just, I don't want us to be like them. That was the part that made my throat close up, because I saw how much it cost him to admit that. To say out loud that he saw the cracks too. That even at 15, he understood there's a difference between smiling in photos and actually showing up when it matters. You did something none of them did, I told him. You noticed? That matters. He looked so relieved, like he'd been waiting to hear that since the night I left. When we finally stood to leave, I hugged him tighter than I had in years, and whispered, "No matter what happens, you'll always have a place with me." As he walked back to the parking lot where Jessica's car was waiting, I watched her sitting behind the wheel, staring straight ahead, pretending not to see me. And for once, I didn't care at all, because that boy, her son, had done what she couldn't. He made me feel seen again. The next time I saw Jessica wasn't planned. But I knew the knock on my door that Sunday afternoon wasn't from a neighbor. It had that kind of stiff, practiced patience only people who are desperate try to pull off. When I opened the door, there she was, again, this time with Michael standing beside her. He was wearing a collared shirt, trying to look put together, but it was wrinkled and buttoned wrong at the top. Jessica had a plastic container in her hands, like it was a peace offering. The moment she saw my face, she hesitated. But she pressed on anyway, using that bright, strained voice she used when she hosted family dinners. "We just wanted to talk, just, clear the air." I stepped back and let them in, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see how far they'd go, how much they'd pretend. They sat down at my kitchen table like it was still their show, like I should feel lucky they remembered me at all. Jessica opened the Tupperware and set it in the middle of the table lemon bars, her usual apology recipe, the same one she once made fun of me for calling too tart. I said nothing. I just sat there across from them, watching them squirm through their rehearsed speeches. Michael started first. "We've had a rough time lately. We realize we could have handled things differently." His voice cracked not from guilt, but from sheer discomfort. His leg bounced under the table, and he wouldn't look me in the eye. Then Jessica jumped in, her tone switching from sweet to blunt so fast it almost felt planned. "Look, Evelyn, I know we've had tension, but this whole inheritance thing, it's a shock. And I don't think it's crazy to say we deserve a little of that. I mean, this family's success didn't happen in a vacuum." The moment the word deserve left her mouth, something in me went quiet. It was the first time she'd stopped pretending. The first time she admitted why they were really here. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just reached under the table and clicked on the voice recorder I'd hidden there before they arrived, because some part of me knew this moment would come when she'd say exactly what she felt. And she kept talking, not even realizing she was digging her own hole. "Michael built this life with your help. Sure, but we've continued that. We've maintained it." Then she said the line that sealed it. "You wouldn't even have that money if not for this family." Michael didn't correct her. He didn't even look up. He just nodded, like he agreed. I looked at them both and asked, calmly, "Is that how you see it?" Jessica blinked, finally realizing she'd gone too far. But it was too late. I stood up, walked to the counter, and picked up the manila envelope I'd prepared days ago in case. I handed it to Michael without a word. Inside was a copy of every document, showing how he'd used Jessica's name to move money. The same papers I'd sent to the SEC. But this time with a little sticky note on top that said, "You're welcome to read what's already public record." They looked at the envelope like it might explode. "You don't need my money," I said, steady and soft. "You need a lawyer." Before they could stammer out anything, I walked to the door and opened it wide. Jessica stood slowly, her face flushed, her lips pressed tight. Michael just stared at the envelope in his hands like a kid caught cheating on a test. As they stepped out, Jessica turned back, about to say something, some last plea or excuse, but I didn't let her finish. I said, Don't worry. This time, you're not going to be cropped out. You're the main picture now. And then I closed the door behind them. Not out of anger, but out of peace. And I closed the door before they could say anything else. I turned off the recorder and sat down at my kitchen table by myself, not feeling like I was waiting to belong to their family anymore. I finally felt proud that I had walked away before they burned everything down with me still inside. The silence after they left wasn't uncomfortable, it felt right. Like my little house could finally breathe, now that all that tension had been pushed out with them. I didn't feel triumphant or bitter. I just felt calm, in a way I hadn't felt in years. That night, I made myself a real dinner, baked chicken and steamed vegetables. Nothing fancy, but something warm that made my apartment smell like home. As I sat there eating, I looked around at my small living room that used to feel lonely. It didn't feel that way anymore. It felt like it was finally mine, not just a place I waited around in for guilt texts from Michael, or the occasional holiday visit. For the first time in a long time, I let myself plan something just for me, something simple but meaningful. I sent a few texts to people who had actually shown up for me when it counted. Mrs. Green from 4B, Larry from next door, Carol and Denise from the church book club, and, of course, Eli, who answered almost instantly, "Yes, I'll be there." By Sunday afternoon, I had the table set for 6 people. The chairs were all mismatched, some borrowed from neighbors. I laid out cloth napkins I'd sewn years ago, but never had a reason to use. A roast was in the oven, filling the apartment with a smell that reminded me of Thanksgiving. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to real smiles, the kind that crinkle up people's eyes and don't need a camera to prove they're genuine. We all sat around my little table, eating, laughing, and telling stories. It wasn't a fancy party. No one was taking pictures to post online. But it was better. It was honest. After dessert, I stood up and told Eli I had something for him. The room went quiet as I handed him a plain cream envelope with his name written in cursive. He opened it slowly, pulling out the papers, and his eyes got wide when he read the top line, 529 college savings plan, fully funded. He didn't say anything at first. He just blinked and looked around the table, like he needed someone to tell him this was real. I said, "This is for you, for noticing when others didn't, for remembering who baked the cobbler and who walked out quietly." He stood up and hugged me, not a quick, awkward teenage hug, but a full embrace that made me close my eyes. And when he whispered, "Thank you, Grandma," I knew I'd done something right. In that moment, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't forgotten. I was the matriarch, again, not of the family I raised, but of the one I built from scratch with people who respected me and didn't ask me to sit in any basement. As the evening wound down, we played cards and passed around leftovers. I realized I didn't need a mansion or a fancy dining room to feel rich. I just needed people who clapped when I stood up to refill their tea, who offered to help with dishes, and who asked for my cobbler recipe like it was worth $1 million. Watching Eli laugh with Denise over a card game he clearly didn't understand, I felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't anger or grief. It was peace, the kind you get when you realize you don't have to beg for a seat at someone else's table when you can build your own. A week after that dinner, Michael showed up alone. No call, no warning, just knocked on my door like someone who wasn't sure what kind of welcome he'd get. I knew it was him before I even opened the door. His knock wasn't rushed or nervous. It was quiet, like a man trying hard to pretend he wasn't about to ask for something he hadn't earned. When I opened the door, he stood there with nothing in his hands. His shoulders slumped, like he'd practiced an apology but forgot the words. "Hi, Mom," he said. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Finally, he added, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, not because I was feeling soft, but because I needed to hear what he had to say without hiding behind a door. He walked in slowly, like the air felt heavier than he remembered. He sat down at the same kitchen table where he used to eat cereal as a kid, but now he looked like a stranger in his own memory. I didn't sit across from him. I stayed standing, arms folded, giving him space to talk. He took a breath. "I know you're probably done with me, and maybe you should be, but I didn't come here to beg. I just needed to say I'm sorry." I nodded once, still silent. His voice grew tighter as he kept going. "Jessica's gone. She took the kids to her mom's place in Florida. The house is on the market. I'm renting a condo near the freeway. I lost everything. Not just the business. All of it. My marriage, my reputation, my peace. I felt the flicker of something then. Maybe regret, not for the man he'd become, but for the little boy I used to tuck in at night, the boy who'd bring me crayon drawings of our house with a big red heart over it and home written in wobbly letters. He looked up at me, eyes red not from crying, but from sheer exhaustion. "You were right," he said quietly, "about Jessica, about Curtis, about all of it, and I was too stupid, or too proud, or too scared to listen." I let him talk. I let him say how he'd let her run everything while he just stood by and watched her hurt me. Then I finally sat down across from him, not close, just far enough to look him in the eye, and I asked, "And what now? What are you really here for?" He sat there, quiet, long enough that I knew he didn't have an answer ready. Finally, he said, "I don't know, maybe just to say I miss you, that I see it now, what I let happen, what I turned into." There was a heavy silence between us, so thick I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then I told him, "You didn't just let it happen, Michael. You chose it, over and over. Every time you watched me being pushed aside and said nothing, you built the house where I was only welcome if I stayed out of the way. And now that it's all fallen apart, you want whatever pieces of me are left." He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. He just nodded slowly and stood up to leave. But before he reached the door, he turned back and said, "So that's it, you're turning your back on your own son." I stood up too. I walked over and held the door open. With my hand on the knob, I looked him in the eye and said, "Family isn't about blood, Michael. It's about who opens the door when you're downstairs alone." Before he could say another word, I closed the door, turned the lock, and walked away without looking back. Because for once, I wasn't the one standing around waiting for an invitation. I was the one deciding who deserved a place at my table. I sat back down with a fresh cup of tea, and for the first time, the quiet in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt like peace I had finally earned. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.